Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to unravel something pretty incredible. We're looking at the 5,000-year-old survival code of an ancient civilization that literally culturally devoured its invaders. We are talking about a region of the world that has forced every single major global power to reckon with it, all the way from antiquity right up to the present day.
So think about how our modern minds work. We kind of split this single piece of geography into two totally different realities. On one hand, you've got Persia. You hear that name and it immediately conjures up this romantic, almost mythical vibe of flying carpets and refined poetry. But on the other hand, you have Iran, a name that instantly triggers images of harsh sanctions, grim news reports, and deep geopolitical tension. It's two names, but it's one land.
Section 1. The Two Faces of Iran.
Now here's where it gets really inexplicable. Think about other ancient powerhouses, the Babylonians, the Hittites, or the Assyrians. They got conquered and they just dissolved into the dust of history. Gone. But these people, they did the exact opposite. They lost on the battlefield, lost their capitals, and endured absolutely brutal occupations. But they refused to vanish.
Just think about the sheer volume of apocalyptic invasions they took on. You've got Alexander the Great's phalanxes marching in, the Arab Caliphate sweeping through, and Genghis Khan's Mongol hordes literally leaving behind towers of skulls. I mean, surviving just one of those seems physically impossible, right? Any other nation would have been permanently wiped off the map.
Section 2. Birth of Linear Time.
To understand how they survived, we have to rewind. Long before anyone was talking about Rome or Athens as the cradles of civilization, the Iranian plateau was busy inventing global diplomacy. When the Akkadian king Naram-Sin went to war with Elam in the 23rd century BC, they didn't just call a simple truce, they signed a written treaty guaranteeing Elam's independence. They basically invented the peace treaty.
Eventually, Indo-Iranian nomadic tribes settled down in these harsh mountains. They called themselves Aryans, which means noble, and they named their land Iran. And right there, their primary weapon was forged. But it wasn't a sword or a shield, it was an ideology. Zoroastrianism gave the nation phenomenal unity. To be an Iranian meant to be a warrior of light, actively assisting Ahura Mazda against the absolute nomadic darkness of Ahriman. And this brought about a massive paradigm shift. They literally invented the concept of linear time, the very way you and I think about our lives today. Before this, the ancient world basically viewed time as an endless, meaningless, repeating circle. But Zoroastrianism declared that time had a clear beginning, a creation, and it actually builds toward a final judgment. When the Persians later liberated the Jews from Babylon, Jewish thinkers adopted this culture of anticipating the end of times, and that doctrine eventually flowed right into both Christianity and Islam.
Section 3. The First Global Superpower.
By 550 BC, a man named Cyrus the Great united the tribes and built the Achaemenid Empire. Under his successor, Darius I, the borders exploded outward, stretching from Egypt all the way to the Indus Valley. 50 million people. That was literally half the population of the entire Earth living under Persian rule at the time. Just a staggering scale. But you don't govern half the Earth by accident, right? They built a hyper-efficient bureaucracy to actually manage dozens of different nations effectively. They divided the map into 20 satrapies, rolled out a unified tax system, minted state gold coins called derricks, and laid down the Royal Road. Honestly, the Royal Road was basically the ancient world's Amazon Prime.
Now, we've all heard the Western myths about 300 Spartans single-handedly crushing the Persians, but the reality was very different. For the giant Achaemenid Empire, losing a few fringe cities was barely a minor inconvenience. The Persians actually used their immense wealth to fund rival Greek states, backing Athens, then Sparta, pitting them against each other. They essentially bought global dominance without having to fire a single arrow.
Section 4. Absorbing the conquerors.
So what happens when an empire this massive finally collapses? Well, here is their ultimate survival mechanism. It's basically cultural digestion. Alexander the Great arrived in 330 BC, ruthlessly crushing the Persian army and burning Persepolis. But wait. Within decades, Alexander is wearing Persian clothes and adopting their court etiquette. The conquerors inevitably became Persian themselves.
Section 5. Surviving caliphs and khans. Let's see how this digestion worked against some of history's most devastating forces. In 651 AD, after grueling wars bled Iran dry, the Arab Caliphate swept in. The last Shah was murdered and Islam arrived. For places like Egypt or Syria, this meant total Arabization. But the Persians, they struck back culturally.
The Islamic Caliphate became completely reliant on Persian bureaucrats and scholars. Their language, Farsi, essentially reprogrammed the caliphate from the inside out.
It even worked against absolute apocalypse. Genghis Khan literally wiped thousand-year-old irrigation systems off the face of the earth. But fast forward a few generations, the fierce nomads who arrived in yurts were suddenly speaking Farsi and building these grandiose, blue-domed Persian mosques under Hulagu. They were irrevocably transformed into Persian patrons of the arts. It's wild.
Section 6. Reclaiming the true name.
All right, let's fast forward to the dawn of the 20th century. The country had become the backdrop for an intense geopolitical thriller known as the Great Game. Suffocating under the weight of colonial powers, you had the British pumping oil in the south and Russian troops occupying the north. The nation was being carved up, and they were forced into a radical pivot to assert their independence.
Which brings us to a fascinating historical moment. Why would a nation suddenly demand that the whole world stop calling it Great Persia, a name recognized and romanticized for centuries?
Well, it wasn't just some random linguistic whim. In 1935, Reza Shah Pahlavi made a firm declaration to the globe. We are not your exotic colonial backdrop of fairy tales and flying carpets. We are a modern, powerful nation with ancient roots. Use our true ancient name, Iran, and you will reckon with us. It was a massive power move.
But as we've seen, the history of Iran is a history of explosive pivots. Decades of political turbulence, of constantly being caught between superpowers on the global chessboard, finally ignited. The 1979 Islamic Revolution happened in a flash. The monarchy fell, a theocratic republic was born, and it drastically shifted the nation's geopolitical stance, firmly severing ties with the West.
And that brings us to today. This singular land is still defined by a relentless struggle over its own 5,000-year legacy. You have the eternal Persia of poetry and magnificent architecture, living side by side in the global consciousness with the modern Iran of fierce independence and strict religious governance. So I want to leave you with this final thought to consider the next time you see headlines about this uniquely resilient civilization. Are we witnessing a quiet, invisible war between who they were in the past, who they are today, and how the world wants to see them? Perhaps their greatest battle isn't on a physical battlefield at all, but hidden right behind a name. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.